Hello again, and thank you for staying with us. Professor Chu Ilo is a research professor of World Christianity and African Studies at DePaul University, authored a piece about the state of the Vatican Church. According to the professor, the Catholic Church today is deeply polarized. He further states that churches in Africa are in the spotlight over divisions and internal fights over money, power and position. He raises the question, how can the church be the conscience of the continent if it's ravaged by the same internal problems found in political institutions? Professor Ilo joins us now to unpack this further. Prof, a pleasure to have you on the program this afternoon. Now, the Catholic Church is facing internal challenges globally. How do the specific issues in Africa, such as the ethnocentrism and abuse of religious authority, indeed contribute to this polarization within the Church?
Thank you very much. I think that there is a crisis of religion that is across the board. It's not simply a crisis that is specific to the Catholic Church. I mean, when you look at the world today, you will see that religion has become a question, a contested question in terms of the value. Africans embrace Christianity to a great extent. They also embraced Islam and other religions. So the problem that you have in the Catholic Church today stems from what I call the crisis of modernity. That is, how do you use an ancient religious institution that was founded over 2,000 years ago, the values, the doctrines, the teachings, the practices, the structures and systems that worked for people 2,000 years ago, how can it work for people today? And more so for us Africans, Western Christianity, and in a specific sense, Catholicism, has stayed in Africa, is dominant in Africa, and there is this pull then between the priorities, the practices, the goals, and the desires of Africans today for social transformation, for an end to poverty, for stable democracies and ecological consciousness, and all those things that we mentioned: peace, tranquility, employment for our young people, health and healing. So these are priorities of Africa, and so the question is, how is the church in this case responding to that? And the local church leaders seem not to be very clear about how they are contributing in a specific sense to addressing some of these myriad problems that we face in the continent of Africa.
So your research emphasizes the importance of African voices in the upcoming Catholic Synod. What are the key areas where African delegates need to articulate their unique perspectives, and why is it so crucial for the future of the modern Catholic Church?
Yeah, I think it's so crucial because the place that Christianity is growing in number is in Africa. There is an exponential growth in the number of people joining the churches, and not only the Catholic Church but all the other churches. So, and secondly, the religious ferment is very, very alive and constantly mutating in Africa. Now, we find ourselves within this context where Pope Francis invites the whole church in 2021 to synod, that is to have a conversation about how to address some of the contested issues today about marriage, about family, about human dignity, about human rights, about peace, and you name it. But the issue is dominated today. The issue that dominates the discussion have been issues emerging from the Western world. They are concerned about issues of same-sex marriage, about the women ordination in the church, and about clerical child abuse and abuse of minors that we find a lot of the crisis or scandal that erupted since 2001 in the United States, in Australia, in Ireland, in Germany, indeed in most countries in the West. So these are issues that are dominating, whereas the African delegates are not finding their own voices to present some of the issues that are peculiar to Africa. And I'm not saying that there are no issues of abuse of children or sexual abuse. We have the problem of celibacy in the Catholic Church in Africa, the issues of polygamy. How do you do with people who have who are polygamous and want to join the church? Should they now put aside their wives and take one in order to receive Holy Communion? We have those issues, but there are more fundamental issues in Africa. The problem of fragmentation. Our society in the continent seems not to find a basis for unity, how we can be united. In all the countries of Africa, I see this problem, ethnocentrism and division, ideological divisions on one hand, or party division, so you don't have a common front anymore. The idea of Pan-Africanism is collapsing. Africans seem to be losing historical consciousness of where we come from and the challenges that are collective to our continent. So these are some of the issues that our delegates are not talking about. How can we have stable democracies in Africa? How can we hold free and fair elections in Africa? How can we stop the exploitation of our poor brothers and sisters in the continent through all forms of pathological performances of religion that only deals with symptoms of problems, like the healing ministries that are growing, the prosperity gospel, and then the religious leaders who are not accountable to their people and who are often as dictatorial as the politicians, the corruption that we find in our churches and in our wider society. And how can we mobilize our young people, many of whom are out of job, out of work? So that, I think, those are the issues that religion can do for us, Catholicism can do for the continent, so that salvation would be liberating of our people from the shackles of poverty and from all kinds of oppressive government, both internal and external to the continent. And then Africa would drive its own agenda. Africans will see themselves as one people moving toward that future, that dream that our ancestors, the Pan-Africanists, thought about many years ago.
So in your analysis, you mentioned that African delegates face challenges in indeed formulating their own agenda for the synod. What steps can be taken to ensure that Africa's diverse issues are not overlooked and that a distinct African agenda is presented here?
Yeah, the first is what you are doing here. We need to talk about ourselves. Like if you do not talk about yourself, others will define you. Right? Like the African proverb that says, until the lions begin to tell their own stories, the hunt will be about the hunters. So that's first of all, that all the agencies for communication, social media outlets like yours, should prioritize what you might call the specific issues facing the continent of Africa. This is required today. The articulation and analysis of the situation in the continent. We need to develop a deeper, a profound understanding and analysis. Because if you do not diagnose a problem correctly, you might be applying the wrong solution. So that's number one. Secondly is, how do we write about this? So what has happened in the current synod is that you have what you call the working document. The working document is a set of questions and analysis already pre-packaged for you. So the questions are set. So it's like an exam. And then you are when you do research, when someone gives you the research question and the methodology, the person already makes it impossible for you to think outside the box. But many years ago in 1974, we had a Tanzanian bishop during the synod of that year. He was one of the secretaries. And when they brought this document, he said, sorry, we had to change some parts of it in order to reflect Africa's priorities and Africa's contextual issues. So that's what I think that can be done. Is not always, it doesn't always make sense that when you get these documents from Rome, that we Africans simply just take this on, hook, line, and sinker without actually challenging the framework. So that is the second point. And then the third point is that, what I have done, I am encouraging many other scholars and church leaders talk about the specific issues that face us. Talk about poverty, the perennial poverty in our continent. How can you preach the gospel to people who are still hanging on the cross? How can you tell them that Jesus is risen when they are suffering? Talk about the issue of the exploitation of Africa, internal colonialism by church leaders, by political leaders, and also the racism that we find in the church. This is a terrible thing that I have experienced as a scholar, as well as one of the church leaders in the continent, that I travel a lot. And it's always that if you're a black person, that you have to always constantly prove yourself. Talk about the mendicancy of the church in Africa, the total dependency of our churches, especially in the Catholic Church. Our church leaders go cap in hand to many Western churches begging for funding. And so when you are doing what a Vatican official calls crib Christianity, you are still like a baby on the crib. You're begging, help me to build a school, help me to build a church, help me to pay salaries. No one will take you seriously if you're a beggar. So a beggarly church, whether it is the Catholic Church or the Anglican Church or some of the Western founded churches, a beggarly African church will not be respected in the worldwide church. So we need to stop begging and harvest the riches and assets of our people. Africa is a rich continent. Why are we not using the agency of faith to create wealth for our people so that we can be respected in the international forum or international fora? So that's the fundamental issue, is the racism that sees Africa as still a continent always in need of help, a continent that is in darkness, a continent that is suffering, and some of our leaders make a lot of money from this mendicancy. And I think that until the churches in Africa, it's not only the Catholic Church, all the churches, until we stop this beggarly condition, this dependency, this cycle of dependency, Africa will continue to be seen as a parasite and not as a prophetic voice, or prophetic voices, a land of prophetic voices. And I think we have the agency, and we have the brains, we have the resources. So why are we not using faith to valorize the agency of our people?
Professor Ilo, let me thank you for your time. That's Professor Stan Ilo, for shedding light on this intricate dynamics regarding the Catholic Church in Africa. We bring you more news and updates shortly after this. Do stay with us.